Originally, I had plans and wrote reviews for the 2 Shaman King Master Spirits games. Sadly, the reviews got wrecked while I was in a panic to possibly get an update from my computer, which in hindsight was a bad idea. So I had to rewrite some of this review. So much for being a guy who has no time management skills whatsoever and is also looking to get into journalism. Anyway, so I figured I'm going to roll with it and post the original plan I had for it in the description, which was the original review of the said game that we're about to get into, and pretty much, you know, just show you as like a little extra, you know, kind of like, you know, the cutting room floor of what happens when you don't properly, you know, create a second backup of a review that you had plans to do and might have taken you about a good 5-6 hours to do so. So enjoy. There are certain games that are labeled as knockoffs, games that are considered cashing in on the craze of a popular series or maybe part of an anime that are pretty much knocking off another popular series. Games like Demi Kids, Robopon, and the Medbots RPG for GBA. While some don't deserve this label and simply only borrow elements of those games or whatever, this time we are going to look at a game that does such a thing, in my opinion. The Shaman King Legacy games. I can't even come up with anything good to say at all about the gameplay. Well, okay, it functions, and if you have already beat every other Shin Megami Tensei game, Dragon Quest Monsters, and Demi Kids, then I give it a shot, but at the end of the day, that's as nice as I can get with it. The gameplay is broken, useless, drawn out, and worst of all, empty. Not to mention, it's a really stupidly easy game for the most part because of, you know, how easy the grind factor is at times, and the fact that you'll get a lot stronger monsters. Not to mention, it tries to do the whole Eevee Ivy thing that Pokemon did with Ruby, and it fails because you could just reset on every single fusion till you get the best possible stats for those characters that you can get out of that fusion. Overall, Shaman King Legacy of the Spirits, Spiriting Wolf, and Soaring Hawk is just an awful game. Every single monster collecting game I've ever played does what it does better. This is what happens when a sweatshop makes games. I know I'm going to hear the whole "what were you expecting" out of it thing. To that I say, a competently made game. This was so boring I think nobody cared. They showed up for a paycheck, hoping they would get fired for making this schlock, and that's what happened. This is easily top 5 worst GBA RPGs in my book, and one of the worst role-playing games I have ever played in my life. There are games that are considered the worst for being broken, pointless, useless, but the worst of the worst in my book are the games that give me nothing salvageable to work with. If you see it, avoid at all costs. It's an empty spot on your Game Boy Advance collection, and I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. The only reason I'm giving it a 2 is because, you know, it fundamentally boots up, you know, the controls aren't completely god-awful, you know, I don't know, I just expect so much better out of Konami, even out of their shovelware titles. There is really no backstory to the development of the game. It was released in February 2005, developed by Konami and published by Konami. That's pretty much all I could find out about it, other than the fact there were 2 different versions released, like the Pokemon series, those being Spiriting Wolf and Soaring Hawk. The only difference between the 2 is that each one has their own exclusive spirits to unlock. I'll get into that later. The plot of the game pretty well follows the plot of the anime from the beginning. To put it short and sweet, you play as Yo Asakura, a kid with the ability to talk to and control spirits for his own purposes. Yo is pretty well destined to enter and win the Shaman King tournament, which is held once every 500 years. Yeah, that pretty well sums it up without spoilers. You will meet friends, rivals, and many enemies along the way, but if you've seen the show, then you know what happens throughout the anime. The graphics are mediocre at best for a 2005 GBA game. The on-field map uses the same engine as Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards are replaced up for construction. This makes every character more or less like a polyhop figure or a bunch of chibis. The fights themselves use pretty decent art. It does a good job of replicating the art style from the show. My problem is that there's no animations at all. None of the attacks have any animation at all. Even with the plot points, it only shows one picture after another. One question, why would you ever forget to add animations at all? Sure, Dragon Warrior had none, but that was more due to the limited knowledge of how much memory was needed for the genre. Not to mention, it came out in 1987 for the NES. This is a GBA game come out 2 years after Pokemon Ruby. There's no excuse for it. It makes every fight boring and pretty well lifeless. The audio is pretty decent. There are some pretty good sounding tracks. Sure, it's not going to be a new standard for music for Konami, but it just shows that even on cheap cash-in games, they still can make pretty good music. I especially like the final boss track in the game. Again, nothing to set the world on fire, but it's good. As for the rest of the audio, it shows up and it does its job and leaves. Nothing really anything too spectacular, but you know, it's not really gonna annoy you at all. The gameplay sucks. The game is a collectible turn-based Jrpg much like Pokemon. You can recruit different spirits and fuse them together to make stronger spirits. Now, I know there's a difference between a ripoff and a game that is trying to compete in the same market. This game, on every sense of the word, is a poor man's Pokemon. The game pretty well rips off Pokemon gameplay, which is considered a competitor of the Dragon Quest Monster series, and both borrow elements from games in the Shin Megami Tensei series. Now, I know the game is supposed to be simplistic, and I shouldn't expect a AAA title out of a game based off of anime. The problem is that it literally makes a poor man's copy of those games. Let me just break down a list of ways it specifically copies Pokemon and makes a sweatshop version of it. Both have specific items you have to use to capture monsters. Number 2, both have a variety of attacks with their own base power, possibility of landing multiple hits, a set number of uses per move, and status afflictions. Number 3, Legacy of Spirits has 3 main stats, while Pokemon has 5, scaling down how much depth there is to battles. Number 4, both are centered around a plot where a kid becomes the best in the world at monster or spirit taming. Number 5, both have 2 versions where you have to get them both to collect them all along with a trait feature. Number 6, both allow you to have a team of 6 while only having 1 monster fight at a time. This would have been a better game if it was released back in the Game Boy Color era where you had Pokemon Gold, Silver, or even Pokemon Red and Blue, but by the time Shaman King came out, it was competing with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, so it's gonna look like a little bit more like a sweatshop version of Pokemon Ruby. Number 7, both have an option for you to store reserves. Legacy limits you to not even a 20th of the number of reserves you can have in Pokemon. Unless there's another way to carry more in your reserves, or in your boxes, where you want to call it, that I didn't find, the fusion system is a must-use so that you don't keep running out of reserve or reserve space. Need I say more? Not to mention the fights in Legacy of the Spirits are boring. With the lack of any animation at all, fights have no impact whatsoever. It's basically rock'em sock'em robots so someone falls over. The only reason any of the fights last longer is that you will miss so many attacks that it drags out fights. This will lead to unnecessary defeats. Moves in the style of Pokemon's triple kick being most useful, and any kind of suicidal attack being pointless, and or leading to free experience. Not to mention, it holds your hand in worse than the Pokemon games. The fights show both characters' attack, defense, and health stats. Meanwhile, on the fact that every attack your spirit turns green when you're about to select it for not very effective against the enemy, yellow for super effective, and white for neutral, it really feels like indirect hand holding. Seriously, if you really think holding my hand helps me play it more, you're dead wrong. The people playing this, for the most part, aren't for, and a simple example of this is the darker art style. If you need any more proof, go watch the show itself. It really feels like it's more of a show built for teenage anime fans than it is for little kids where this game feels like it's like a really dirt simple RPG. This is what Pokemon is still around, and Shaman King is a manga series in Japan. I feel Game Freak was trying to make a big-time seller and start a new franchise for Nintendo. So they looked at the concept of Dragon Quest Monsters or Shin Megami Tensei, streamlined the combat, made it more open to more players, gave it a cute mascot in Pikachu, and it became a cultural phenomenon. You can't just copy a game like it, not understand why it's popular, and not bring something right to the table. Go ask the guys who worked on Spectros, Bakugan, Demi Kids, and so forth on why they don't have a dynasty while Nintendo has had one with the Pokemon series.